Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we shall now continue with our second session. The topic is Reviewing the Preventing and Countering Violent Extremism.
Where to sit? I think it is first speaker.
Thank you very much, Puan Shamila. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we will move on to the next session. And in session 2, the discussion will revolve around the progress of preventing and countering violent extremism as a tool to challenge violent extremist propaganda and narratives. In this session, speakers will elaborate on the various methods applied to counter online and offline extremism. This is where we will explore the success of efforts taken to increase the skills and sharpen the knowledge of CVE practitioners at the regional level. The first discussion will be on boosting efforts and ideas in PCVE by Ms. Arul Mala Palinivelu, who is an analyst and assistant director in the Digital Strategic Communications Division of the Southeast Asia Regional Center for Counter-Terrorism at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Malaysia. Her focus areas are the role of youth in preventing violent extremism, social cohesion, digital resilience and culture, and PVE. She is also a certified trainer in content creation and digital media management. With that, I would like to pass the stage over to you, Ms. Arul.
Thank you, Ms. Nadia, for that wonderful introduction. Good evening to all delegates, speakers, partners, and everyone who has actually taken the initiative to join today's session. Since the introduction about me has already been made, so I'm just going to jump right in. Okay, so boosting the efforts and ideas in PCVE. Okay, so the first. Okay. Many of us here have been in the field for years now, and the term requires no introduction, but there would be some who are still not familiar yet with the term, or there would be some who are online who are just joining for the first time to know what PCVE is. There's no one unanimously, universally accepted or definition for PCVE. So I'm just going to give you the definition of PCV, which I have understood myself, being in this field. PCV is basically proactive, non-coercive actions to counter the efforts by violent extremists to radicalize, recruit, and mobilize followers to violence. Violent extremists do this by addressing specific factors that facilitate and enable recruitment and radicalization to violence or violent extremism. Potential recruits here, they usually have certain grievances, or they're searching for a certain sense of belonging. They have many factors, the potential factors of why they could be joining violent extremist groups. So these are the factors that violent extremists would tap into. Okay, and PCVE here addresses those factors or root causes with the aim of finding peaceful, inclusive, and sustainable solutions. Simply put, we counter violent extremism by preventing it, not preventing it happening. Just think of violent extremism as COVID, as the virus. And countering it is the treatment or medication after you have actually got COVID. And prevention here is the vaccination, is all those remedies that you're actually following at home so that you don't get COVID. So that is PCVE. Just like finding an effective vaccine is tough, finding peaceful, inclusive, sustainable solutions is not an easy task as well. So it requires comprehensive and coordinated effort driven at regional, international, national, community, even grassroots levels that leverages different sectors such as faith-based, youth, women organization, as well as media, civil society organizations, business communities, educational institutions. The list is non-exhaustive. Okay, so basically that's the introduction for PCVE. Okay, so now let's move on to boosting the efforts and ideas in PCVE. To ensure an effective coordinated effort, we have to work together, bringing in all the relevant stakeholders, players, and actors. Why? Because not one agency in this world has all the experts or all the answers. Each and every one of us have our unique skills. Each and every agency, each and every players have our expertise, which can actually fill in the gaps. And as a government organization, we do have limited resources or limitations when, during our outreach. So that's when we need all the other players coming in. This is called as a whole of society approach. This approach has been recommended by the international organizations, especially the UN bodies. Even Madam Miriam and the ministerial keynote address just now had mentioned the importance of the whole of society approach. But what is this and how does it help in boosting efforts and ideas in PCVE? A whole of society approach is an approach where both relevant governmental and non-governmental actors across the sectors working together in preventing violent extremism. So I have actually given a list, but the list is non-exhaustive, as I said before. Ministries and government agencies, education institutions, international organizations, CSOs, youth leaders, faith-based organizations and leaders, community leaders, private business sectors, tech companies, women, youth, media. Everyone needs to work together. Only then we can actually come up with an effective, sustainable solution. We have several factors and root causes to address, but how can we expect just one agency or one entity to be able to do it all on its own? So this is where we need the cooperation and the collaboration. Speaking about my topic today on boosting efforts and ideas in PCVE, it can be done in many ways. But I would like to focus on certain ways which has been tried and tested by CSAT, which I have actually been part of ever since I joined CSAT. And based on my experience, I can say these efforts have been working. First, there's a need to create awareness about VE and PCVE, because VE happens both online and offline. It's not just at one place or one area. For instance, there are those who consume some potentially dangerous material online, saving those materials without even knowing that they're actually committing a crime. So they need to be given the awareness that, it's a crime, it's illegal. There are repercussions, for you to do when you do this. So these consumers, sometimes they're not aware of it. So what do? We create the awareness, we spread the awareness. And the violent extremist narratives out there are pretty convincing. But those narratives are filled with misinformation. How would the users know that? Many are unaware of the proper channels to approach about these matters. So we have to create the awareness about these channels that they can actually approach when they do counter such narratives. As mentioned earlier, there are factors or root causes that needs to be addressed, especially to ensure that these factors are not used by violent extremists. But we can't be shielding everyone, right? So we need to work as a community to strengthen our resilience. That's our shield. And this resilience is not just community level, but also on digital platforms as well. So that's when building community and digital resilience plays a part. And how do you increase the effectiveness of this resilience is by using the power of social cohesion. Socially cohesive society, it's like a strong shield which can be hardly penetrated. That's what we are aiming for. We can actually do it by building the capacity, not only for the officers who are actually working on this or the practitioners, but build the capacity of the CSOs, the medias, all our partners who are actually working with us on this. Another way is actually by addressing those root causes or the factors which is actually being used by these violent extremists as well. So addressing that, as I said before, we can't just expect one agency or one entity to do it all. We need our partners out there on the ground to actually come up with all the data or the strategies, the ideas, which we can actually work together on. Just to give you a little on the online presence, okay? Based on the statistics now, in January 2022, the internet user penetration is 29.55 million users. It's like 89 point something %, and it's increasing. That's January. So we know that the internet is becoming more and more saturated with contents, and we don't know what contents our people are actually consuming. So building digital resilience is very important, people. Okay, when it comes to capacity building, Siasat has been working with several partners. I'm very happy to see most of our partners are here. We have been coming up with programs which builds capacity for our CSOs. We have had IKRAM, Pusat Commerce, all being part of our collaboration as well as our partners. We have had generous fundings from our wonderful funders like EU, Government of Japan, and US Embassy, who are also helping with all of our efforts. And this helps because, as we said, we need the international, regional players as well working together on these programs or with the initiatives. These initiatives, most of it is on building capacity for media to know what are the right terms to use during reporting, the do's and the don'ts, the best practices. We actually did that with UNDP. And when it comes to CSOs, how they can actually incorporate monitoring and evaluation. The earlier speaker, Ms. Munira, she emphasized on the importance of monitoring and evaluation to know the efficacy, the effectiveness of the programs. So we did a capacity building program with the CSOs so that they can actually come up with a program design which incorporates M&E, especially focusing on the youth programs. So with this, we would know if when the program is implemented, whether the program works, or if even it doesn't work, then we know why it did not work, or what we can actually do to maybe use those data to come up with a better program. Okay, next. Working with youth, that's my forte. So working with youth is actually part of what the Digital Strategic Communications Division, Siasat, has been doing, and I'm actually part of the team. And my portfolio is, of course, working with youth. And there's already an existing mechanism there when it comes to like social media. So what I did was just like trying to get in and understand how it works and how we can actually make it better. Okay, so we have a few things when it comes to like working with youth because they are pretty versatile. They have a lot of knowledge when it comes to the online world, and we need to tap into it. So we have done programs with them. We have a dedicated social media for youth for them to actually be part of. And we also have social media campaigns that we actually run for them, and also some publications. So I'm just going to briefly just give like an introduction for what we have actually done, so that I only have like 3 minutes and 50 seconds more. Okay, so we have done one about narratives, and it's called Besnya, and part of it was actually running a youth parliament, a mini parliament kind of setting where we actually gave our participants, the youth participants who are from university grads, an opportunity to actually voice out their grievances by giving them each, their own ministries and the topics that they would like to speak on. And we realized that they're actually pretty vocal. They want their voice to be heard. They want a space where they can safely convey their messages. So while we actually did Besnya, we also came out with, okay, so we understand that you need a space. So how do you use that space? And eventually, we did give them a space. And then we did programs on building digital resilience, how to use their already obtained talent, like, for content creation, using apps, especially using TikTok since it's getting, the traction now. So how to create contents. And these contents are not exactly just like, on CVE or, countering violent extremism, but more like positive messaging, so that we can actually also give alternate narratives to the consumers out there. That was in the Tiber. We had another program on the building community resilience, which was actually civics. Pretty recently, we actually did with 120 polytechnic students around Malaysia. It was called the Malaysian Youth as Peace Ambassadors, where we actually give them like 5 days of not just us giving them whatever knowledge that we have, sharing insights, but we got feedback from them. They shared their stories. We actually gave them an avenue where they can actually come up with contents. And the same we tried to do under Pelita as well, together with UNDP and EU. In Pelita here, we actually addressed hate speech. We specifically focused on hate speech and how hate speech can eventually move someone into the space of violent extremism. And that was very successful because we have participants from the Pelita program who are now our peace messengers and peace ambassadors out there. They are actually spreading the contents that they have actually created. We have our social media, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, and based on the input that we have actually got from the youth, TikTok is where they are now. They're actually moving out from Facebook, so we are following them to TikTok. My Aman is actually our platform for the youth, and currently we are running a campaign called My Stand For. And also, again, listening to what they actually want, we created a safe space under Discord where they frequent, calling ourselves the Peace Ninjas. We use the power of our creativity to come up with alternative narratives and counter-narratives so that we can actually put it out there. These are youth-created contents for their fellow youth. We also have content creation, which you can actually check out on YouTube, and also publications. Civet Cat is actually our comic series where we work with 3 young Malaysian comic artists with storylines that show us how technology can be used and can be misused. Okay, I only have a few more seconds. I'm going to run it really quick. Okay. Okay, so how do we also partner with other stakeholders for other areas that we can actually look at? Okay, we're looking at gendered approach to, because it's not just a male thing, but female has to be included as well. Okay. Can I be given an extra 1 minute? Thank you. Okay, we also have our university lecture series where we partner with speakers and students. We actually partnered with an expert of cybersecurity from UK, Dr. Robert Hercock, where he actually spoke about the new emerging technologies and how we can work with. We worked with Gallery Petronas to use arts as a tool to build resilience. We have a program which we recently concluded, the program Kenegaraan, where we use social cohesion and unity. We had a dialogue about how we can actually do more to increase the social cohesion part. We are also in plans to run a program where we use sports as a tool to promote unity and cultivate pro-social behaviors. And we have like cross-regional and regional programs. And all this is actually our way of incorporating the whole of society approach. Moving forward, what we can actually do to continue to boost efforts and ideas in PCVE, again, I'm going to reiterate what we have to engage with all stakeholders, community level, local level, national level, regional level, international level, every sector relevant to the cause. We need to share our best practices, what works, what does not, expertise. We need expertise because as government entity, as I said, we have limited resources, limitations on what we can actually do on topics. We can't expect one person like me to speak on cybersecurity and also to speak on, arts and other stuff. So we need expertise, experts to come along, to work along with us and in efforts of boosting PCVE ideas and efforts. Public and private partnership, tech companies, they need to, it would be really good if we can actually work with all these tech companies as well because they know the in and outs of their apps and how things work. So probably capacity building our youth to use the right features or the marketing strategies that we need to push our positive messagings and contents. And we need to partner with our youth. Instead of seeing them just like beneficiaries, we need to see them as our partners so that we know what exactly they need and we can actually start a safe space for them so that they can actually open up to us. And also, through doing this, they can actually approach their peers. So from us, it goes to them, from them goes to way more. And also the importance of whole of government and whole of society approach. As I said, it's not a one-person thing. It's we need an army of people to actually boost the efforts and ideas of PCVE. Finally, my last slide, yay. Okay, so I believe we only have like few minutes for question and answer, and probably there would be some proposals or ideas for us to further collaborate. There's a lot of potential collaborators here. If there's any ideas or questions, please do email me. My WhatsApp number is here, WhatsApp me. Thank you, that's it.
Thank you, Ms. Arul. I think it's very important that we take cognizance of how powerful digital platforms and also social media is in combating terrorism even. Thank you, Ms. Arul. Now, over the years, there has been a gradual expansion of development in the European Union into security-related areas such as PCVE. The next discussion will narrow down into efforts taken by the EU in security cooperation. For this, I would like to invite Mr. Mark Vierstad Verlende, who is a counter-terrorism security expert, European Union delegation to Indonesia and Brunei Darussalam, and delegation to ASEAN. He is a senior police officer in the Belgian Federal Criminal Police, who is currently seconded to the European Union. Based in Jakarta, Indonesia, his task is to analyze the counter-terrorism and countering violent extremism situation in the 10 ASEAN countries, looking at what the added value of the EU can be. With that, the stage is yours, Mr. Mark.
Dear highly valued participants, selamat datang to everyone in the room and online. I am delighted to participate actively and to speak on the second panel, Efforts in Preventing and Countering Violent Extremism, a review, and this by giving a presentation on the EU's efforts regarding PCVE in the recent years in Malaysia and more specifically in the whole of Southeast Asia. Thanks in particular to Ms. Miriam Fischer, Director of the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung in Malaysia, for the invite, and to Mr. Timo Goosman, Acting Head of EU Delegation in Kuala Lumpur, for the coordination and bringing me in contact with Malaysia again and with also the EU delegation and with you, of course. My name is Mark Vierstad Verlende, Belgian citizen, and as member of the Belgian Federal Criminal Police for more than 42 years now, I'm seconded to the European Union as EU counterterrorism security expert for Southeast Asia. Security means not all kind of security, but security related to terrorism. For instance, you have cybersecurity, you have cybersecurity related to criminality, and there is also cybersecurity related to terrorism. Southeast Asia means that I have a regional coverage. This means the 10 ASEAN countries. The regional coverage has, of course, an influence on my daily life and on my workload and work capacity, and so you will hear this in my presentation that I will have, and since the beginning, when I arrived in 2018, that I will have to work all days with priorities. I will guide you through the CT-PCVE situation in Southeast Asia by giving a presentation in two parts, entitled EU Efforts Regarding PCVE in the Recent Years in Southeast Asia. First part will be a very brief security situation and threat assessment in Southeast Asia. We heard already a lot of information today on this, so only a few aspects that are, in my opinion, or in the opinion of the European Union, important to mention. The second part will be more on the EU activity plan on CT-PCVE for Indonesia and the region. This is a plan that we constructed for 2 years, 2020, for 4 years, 2020 till 2024. And a second part is also other ongoing EU activities and projects in the region. In my position as a CT expert, I always keep in mind that I'm like the eyes, the ears, and the mouth in Southeast Asia as representative of the European Union, and that it is very important to look which are the connections between one or more Southeast Asian countries and the EU, and what the added value can be of the European Union in Southeast Asia. This aspect must be mutual, as we can, of course, always learn from each other. Fighting terrorism is a top priority for the EU and its member states. Terrorism and violent extremism are threats that do not recognize borders and affect countries and people irrespective of their geographical location. The European Union is enhancing its cooperation in the domain of CVE with very different partners in Southeast Asia region, such as government counterparts, community leaders, civil society organizations, and relevant regional and international organizations. And I will also mention it today, a whole of society approach is very essential in the fight against terrorism and is a priority way of working for the EU. The importance of addressing these issues and the need to step up activities with partners in these areas is also clearly recognized in the new EU strategy for cooperation in the Indo-Pacific, as well as in the recent EU strategic compass. The security situation and threat assessment in Southeast Asia. The information given in part 1 is based on regular contacts that I have with different partners in the region and some of my resources on the ground. It's a good thing that COVID is done, because now we can go outside again, and also information sources can go outside again too. So I will give you some aspects of CVE which are currently the most widely discussed aspects or issues in the region. First of all, the threat level and the number of terrorist attacks remains the same since the beginning of 2020 in Southeast Asia, not specifically grown since the COVID-19 pandemic began in 2020. There are no extremist groups operating in the region that present a serious threat to stability or that are beyond the capacity of the police to manage. As the COVID-19 pandemic still isn't finished, in fact, completely, my statement written in previous reports remains important in the region. And the statement sounds as follows. A major negative effect resulting from the COVID-19 crisis is the weakening of adequate, optimal, and intensive information position in security in general and in criminal investigations in particular of the intelligence and law enforcement services. So this means, and this is the fact, and we can see the results of the number of arrests in the region, security services have to remain vigilant about a possible rebound in terrorist activities and/or attacks. Second aspect is the increasing independence of ISIS-affiliated groups. We heard a lot of the different groups in Southeast Asia. Well, the difficulty of getting to Syria or any other jihad theater has possibly taken away a powerful ISIS role in the region. The affiliated groups like GI, GID, MIT, ASG get more and more independent from ISIS in their terrorist activities, but also and especially in their recruitment, more online then. But of course, without the certainty that the role of ISIS would have been played fully in the region. A third aspect is the online propaganda and recruitment in combination with powerful and successful authority and police operations in the region. Very important to mention is the fact that jihadist groups like ISIS and affiliated groups try massively to recruit, radicalize, and plan attacks through social media propaganda. The main intelligence analyst of Densus 88, a special unit of the Indonesian National Police, stated that terrorist groups use COVID-19 to increase their resources and to strengthen the preparations of attacks, especially by using online platforms to spread their ideology and to incite the potential recruits to violence. But the security and intelligence authorities remain successful in the region. For instance, thanks to the new Indonesian law on terrorism since 2018 in Indonesia and the new Anti-Terrorism Act in the Philippines from 2020. The Indonesian National Police has two examples in strong cooperation between their investigators, the intelligence units and Densus 88, proceeded to massive arrests, for instance 232 persons in 2021, of members of GI and especially members of MIT in Sulawesi. This MIT group has or had the largest expansion in the entire region for a certain while. Second example is the Anti-Terrorism Council, ATC, of the Philippines has designated the Communist Party of the Philippines, New People's Army, CPP-NPA, and the Islamic State East Asia, the Maute Group, Dawla Islamiyah, as terrorist organizations, associations, and or group of persons. This was the first time a designation took place under the new Anti-Terrorism Act in the Philippines. The last 2 years, most new members of the different terrorist groups in the region have been recruited online. However, the security authorities have warned that offline recruitment through prayer groups and Islamic boarding schools continues to happen. But it has been hindered by the social distance restrictions. GAD in Indonesia, as well as the Abu Sayyaf group in the Philippines, still remain a key threat to security forces, and its sleeper cells have proved to be difficult to track. The fourth point is the increasing active role of women in the region, emphasis on the active role in terrorist activities and groups. Since 2016, female radicals in the region have taken on combat roles as attackers. The Surabaya bombings in May 2018 became the first successful attack in Southeast Asia involving female combatants. The active participation of female Indonesian suicide bombers in the twin suicide attacks in Jolo, a known stronghold of the ISIS affiliate Abu Sayyaf group in the southern Philippines 2 years ago, indicates the increasing active role of female terrorists in the whole Southeast Asia region. The twin bombing attacks took 14 lives and marked at that time the second female suicide bombing in the Philippines and the fourth in the whole of Southeast Asia. This phenomenon is identified as a very important priority in the Indonesian Bali Work Plan and also in the EU activity plan on CTP-CVE for Indonesia and the region. The push for women to take up arms comes from radical women on social media and ISIS propaganda on platforms such as Facebook. These platforms promote the message that women are key success to their husbands and the total Muslim community. The active increasing role of women is also demonstrated in the financial management of terrorist groups and activities, especially in the Philippines. This for the first part. The second part about what we are doing as EU in the region. The EU activity plan on CTP-CVE for Indonesia in the region. As I have a regional role in the implementation of the EU's external CT policy, including the ongoing development and coordination of EU efforts in the areas of CT and PCVE in the region, I still continue in the chosen direction based on the analysis that I did in 2019. I was lucky as I arrived in 2018 that I had a whole year to analyze the CT and PCVE situation and activities and projects in the region, and which resulted in, at the end of 2019, in an EU work plan on CT-PCVE in Southeast Asia, agreed by EU headquarters in September 2019. It was very essential, especially in the 3 priority countries in Southeast Asia, these priority countries are the countries that are the most involved, in fact, in Southeast Asia, in the area of CT and PCVE. They are Indonesia, the Philippines, Malaysia, and I also mention Thailand. In the deep south of Thailand, they have also a problem on CT-PCVE. This was important to establish the necessary projects and activities in the hereafter mentioned CT-PCVE related EU crime priorities. So what are the priorities for the EU? This means not that we want to impose it, but it's based on the analyzed situation, and it's based on a matrix that we made in, later on in 2020 with a number of documents, especially ASEAN documents and regional documents, such as the Bali Work Plan, which has been endorsed, ASEAN endorsed, has been, with other words, accepted by the whole, by the 10 ASEAN countries to work on. The EU priorities for the region are, first of all, in counter-terrorism, and all these aspects, we already heard them today. The first in CT is the thematic area finance, the anti-money laundering, and the countering of terrorism financing, with an accent on corruption. Remember, the money is the center of gravity for criminals, so for sure also for terrorists. In preventing and countering violent extremism, the EU proposes two priority areas. The first one is gender, the empowerment of women, children, and families in countering radical and violent extremist narratives, within priority the increasing active role, as I already mentioned, of women in terrorist activities or terrorist groups. The second PCVE priority is on prisons, de-radicalization and disengagement programs for terrorist inmates and families, the complete process of radicalization, the time being in prison, and deeper radicalization, especially rehabilitation and reintegration process. I have to add to this aspect of PCVE work that rehabilitation and reintegration of youth and children that were involved in or that were recruited by terrorist organizations and undertook terrorist activities in a certain way, this rehabilitation and reintegration of these children is very important to the EU, and also I know that to a lot of partners in the region. These children are victims of our society, and we are obliged as society to help them and not to let them in prison. This is not the right place. I had the luck to visit the prisons in Manila, where the perpetrators of the Marawi siege were incarcerated, and I could visit one cell. I was inside of one cell. 8 people were inside. The oldest one was 63 years old, was one of the main targets of the Marawi siege. The youngest 3 boys were 2 Indonesian boys and 1 Filipino, 15 and 16 years old. I nearly cried, if I am honest. So we are obliged to help these children. We have a host of project opportunities, and this is important for all kind of partners present in the room and online. We have now a host of project opportunities, namely under the project Enhancing Security Cooperation in and with Asia, ASEWA, to use in order to implement these EU priorities. The overall objective of the action in the new projects is to enhance EU security and defense cooperation in and with Asia. To identify complementary and coordinated activities and projects, and to refine these EU priorities that I already mentioned, with added value for the EU and the region, we organized a number of webinars in 2020, as there was no possibility to organize seminars. The title was under the title EU Perspectives on CT-PCV in Southeast Asia. These webinars were necessary because At the end of 19, we drafted already a work plan, but in 1 year time, a lot's changed. And certainly with COVID-19, it changed the whole of society. So we needed these webinars to see if the priorities didn't have changed in the meanwhile because of COVID at that time. And it did. The final result of the webinars were 15 recommendations. Based on these 15 recommendations, we drafted the EU activity plan on CTP-CVE for Indonesia and the region. 12 activities and projects that have to be developed. And we started with the development in 2021. It was a pity that we had to do it online, but a number of these activities were started online. Since 12 currently, we already developed a few online activities, workshops and meetings, and even 2 in-person conferences in 2022. One on the development of the Indonesian IK Hub, is Indonesian Knowledge Hub, a platform for information exchange in March 2022. And secondly, the EU Indo-Pacific Regional Seminar on CTP-CVE in May 2022 under the title Preventing Terrorist Attacks and Fighting Radicalization Through Better Detections of Weak Signals and Information Sharing. Important to mention is that once you make a plan, we drafted a plan, this EU activity plan in the beginning of 2020. Because of COVID, a lot of things changed. An activity plan should be a living document, I always say. It has to be evaluated at certain moments and has to be adapted to the actual or current situation. There were 3 items important in this seminar that were programmed and for which we had a lot of presentations and especially brainstorming sessions or breakout sessions to discuss more in detail about these subjects. 3 subjects. The first one was the thematic area around the eventual necessity and development of a Southeast Asian Regional Operational Information Center. You will see that since COVID-19, it is confirmed for the 1000th time that information and communication in police work, in information exchange and use is always and will always stay interesting for future activities and projects. The second thematic area is around community policing approach. Community policing is a very sensitive issue. It was sensitive in the EU also when we started working with community policing 15-20 years ago. But it is important. Community policing is very connected with the whole of society approach, of course. Everyone plays a role. Community policing is not only about police that has a role in detecting signals, weak signals in society to see if there is a problem with children or with a certain community. It's much broader. It's everyone's role, in fact. So again, this whole of society approach. The third aspect is specifically thanks to or due to COVID-19 is CT new technologies, the use of internet. The use of internet has totally changed since COVID, and I would say misused. It has been misused by terrorist organizations. We call it all social, like Facebook are social platforms, but because of certain groups, they have been misused. So we have to look more in detail how they use it, how we are able to counter this misuse of internet possibilities given to the society, and specifically vulnerable in this area are, of course, our youth and children again. So these three thematic areas have become new priorities in the EU activity plan, which we will work out in new concept note with different kind of partners, and I hope that I will have a connection now with a number of you to give you the possibility to work out these priorities also. Important remark to all these EU priorities is the GCTF. I don't know who mentioned it. I think it was mentioned in the beginning. The Global Counterterrorism Forum meeting was held on the last 21st September on the sidelines of the high-level week of the United Nations General Assembly, and aimed to plan the priorities to go forward and to better manage the threat of terrorism, involving the government authorities and the community, and this through a whole-of-society approach. Three priorities were suggested on this meeting. The first one is strengthening cooperation with technology experts to prevent the use, and I would add the misuse, of information technology for acts of terrorism. Second aspect is strengthening efforts the chain of terrorism financing, such as the use of virtual currencies. And the third aspect was strengthening the role of women in responding to extremism and tackling terrorism. As you could hear from my presentation, all these three items are already subject of our EU activity plan on CTP-CVE for Indonesia and the region. I had a last point foreseen, but I am I passed away my time, I think. A last point on coordination. We talk a lot about cooperation in the region, but when I arrived here 4 years ago at the end of 2018, there were already a lot of activities ongoing in PCVE, organized by different organizations, but it's nice to cooperate, but there should be also more coordination. And then I look especially to my own organization, the EU, European Union, as state, that we should communicate and not only cooperate, but coordinate. This is very important because if there is overlapping in the region, it is a loss of money. And we can use every euro or every rupiah or every, I don't know the name from Malaysia, but we can use every cent of our money for this. I will leave it to there. The European Union is really convinced, more than ever before, that our further EU support in the whole Southeast Asian region is really a must. Therefore, we already look forward to a more and better cooperation and coordination with all of you. Thank you very much for your attention. Terima kasih banyak.
Thank you to Mr. Mark Verstaat Valente for sharing and shedding light on efforts taken in security-related areas in the European Union. Now, our next speaker will give an assessment on preventing and countering violent extremism by presenting a case study on the Malaysian Armed Forces. He is Colonel Dr. Nizlan Muhammad, who is the Director of Contemporary Security at the Malaysian Institute of Defence and Security, MiDAS. He has been an artillery officer since joining the Malaysian Armed Forces in 1989. He has held various appointments and positions in the Artillery Unit, the Artillery Directorate, and the Army Headquarters throughout his military career, including the commanding officer of the 4th Royal Artillery Regiment based in Seremban Negeri Sembilan. He was also awarded several medals for his service from the state of Negeri Sembilan, Kelantan, and the Ahli Mangkunegara in 2015. With that, Colonel, the floor is yours.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah, thank you, Ms. Nadia, for the introduction. Esteemed speakers, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and very good afternoon. Well, the past two speakers have talked about PCVE in regional and also in locally, and they have a broad perspective of PCVE. But let me bring all of you back to Malaysia. Let me bring you all the focus toward the Malaysian Armed Forces and the PCVE that we conducted in Malaysian Armed Forces. Well, today I will elaborate on the evaluation of PCVE mechanism in the Malaysian Armed Forces that involve military personnel. The case study is conducted during my research in the field of terrorism and violent extremism a few years ago. But then, of course, there are some new details and current details that will be included in my presentation. Well, whatever you do, we must start from the top, and this is a clear direction from the Prime Minister, who was then the Defense Minister 2 years ago, which in accordance with the inaugural Defense White Paper, the Ministry of Defense reassured that Malaysia would continue to actively combat against all forms of terrorism and violent extremism globally as part of a holistic anti-terrorism campaign. A little bit overview of what I'm going to speak today. It is evident that the global spread of terrorism has been prevalent for the past decades. It is evolving over the years, particularly during the pandemic and the endemic period now, and is deemed as one of the severe effects of human suffering. Terrorism remains as one of the greatest threats to social well-being. It is reported that in Malaysia, there are over 260 people have been arrested for terrorism-related offenses since 2013, and at least 14 planned terrorist attacks have been averted by the authority. And according to the Chief of Defense Forces, Malaysian Armed Forces, the Malaysian Armed Forces has a significant role in strengthening the comprehensive defense concept together with other security agencies. Let me give you a little bit a brief on the violent extremism issues in Malaysian Armed Forces nowadays. It is reported in Straits Times in 2015, way back in 2015, 70 army personnel have been alleged to be involved in ISIS militant group. And at that time, who is also the defense minister now, mentioned that 1% of all suspects to be involved in militant activities are Indonesian Armed Forces personnel. And to add on, the Deputy Director General of the Armed Forces Regional Corps said that military and police personnel are targeted by ISIS because they are already skillful in terms of handling weapons. And prior to that, in November 2014, the Malaysian Chief of Defense Forces have announced the formation of Task Force Perisai Wira, which is under the Defense Intelligence Security Division, and now it is under Malaysian Defense Intelligence Organization, which monitors and prevent military personnel suspected to be involved in ISIS or Daesh ideology. We know from the fact that here the threat of terrorism, extremism, or pre-terrorism phenomenon in Malaysian Armed Forces is inevitable. Its involvement is unpredictable and requires critical assessment. Therefore, the need to construct adequate enhancement of the current PCVE measures is essential. Okay, for easier understanding of terminology, as mentioned by Ms. Arul just now, and also for us to have a better understanding, some pertinent definition is included in my here, which is first, the counterterrorism or the anti-terrorism is more on the hard approach that integrates and synergizes all mechanisms in the government sector, training establishment, enforcement agencies, NGOs, private and public sectors, and also military establishment to strategize and combat any form of terrorism threat. Meanwhile, the preventing countering violent extremism, or PCVE, is more on the soft strategy approach used to combat or to confront violent extremism ideologies and radicalization. This soft approach is more towards educate personnel and society, awareness program, and also to have counter narratives program to restore the fundamental beliefs and change individuals' mindset and their linkages toward micro-level establishment. The objective is to bring back all these personnel to have a more moderate position and to perform their regular duties in the armed forces. Here is more on the stages of a terrorist. It is to differentiate whether the counter-violent extremism or the counter-terrorism. The first is on the before violence occur, we have the sentiment, the stages start with sentiment, extreme and radical. And when violence already occurred, then we'll call it the counter-terrorism, which is stages of militant and also lastly on the terrorist. I will now focus on the case study in Malaysian Armed Forces. I've conducted 14 participants interview, personal interview, which is under the Perisai Satya program and Task Force Perisai Wira. The research of the design is more towards to explore real-life human experience, and semi-structured question is posed, and interview protocol and constant comparison is conducted, whereby all participants have to undergo the identification context. We have transcription process, thematic analysis, the framework of coding pattern, and lastly, the findings and also the analysis of the case study. This is more, I'm focusing towards the evaluation or the outcome of these findings of the case study. Let's a bit on the PCVE program that is being conducted by the MDIO. It is a task force Perisai Wira, which is more towards the purpose and overall objective is to root out, contain and prevent any threat pertaining to terrorism or violent extremism in the armed forces. These include acts such as to monitor dissemination of counter narratives of Islamic State through cyber platform, increase awareness about violent extremism, and provide clear and accurate perspective on the jihad concept, as well as to implement the de-radicalization program. All these counter-narratives mechanism include series of lectures, awareness program, and published booklet, brochures regarding the threat of ISIS or Daesh. In 2021 and this year alone, there are 39 series of awareness program being conducted all over the military camps in Malaysia, and the focus is more on the topic of extremism, radicalization, terrorism threats to Malaysian Armed Forces and to address to all military personnel. Here are some of the counter-narratives initiatives by the Malaysian Armed Forces, MDIO, which produce booklet and posters, as well as articles about PCVE, and also to inform all military personnel on the threat of violent extremism and terrorism. This is the next 3 slides. I will focus more on the evaluation part of the case study. The first is on the exploring method. This exploring method will also involve the individuals and also the organizers of the program. This is a checklist assessment framework of task force program by Miles 2014. We have 7 conditions here, and also it involves participants and also for organizers. We have the commitment and understanding condition. Here, either it is strong or moderate. This is to analyze the participation level. We also have the admin, training, and also the management of the program, which reflects how the program is conducted in terms of preparation, facilities, and planning of the program. Next is to evaluate the SKA, or the skills, knowledge, and attitude by both participants and also organizers of the program. This is more towards their dedication, their seriousness, and ability to contribute to the program. The last two items is more on the impact of the program, especially on the improvement aspect, on the schedule, the substance, materials, or expert speakers to speak and to assist on the program, and get feedback on the program to attain, either to attain positive or negative impact to the program and to the organization. The second part of evaluation is the explaining method, which is a case dynamic matrix. This is to evaluate the task force program, also by Miles, 2014. There are 4 items here, which is what are the problems in CVE program, what are the underlying issues, how to manage it, and how to resolve it. For example, the first is on conflicting presentation by the presenter, whereby he mixed the core element of PCVE with some politic issues. And from the researcher view, we know that is a diverse duties, and there are some interconnectivity between violent extremism and politics at one point. But at the same time, the presenter need to perform the talk meticulously, focus towards the main criteria of PCV approach, and informative and preventive measures. And lastly, how to resolve it is more to re-evaluate the presenting method, get the feedback, and also discuss with other authorities. This is the how to resolve in terms of the procedural change. The next problems we encounter is on the implicating prominent religious political leader within the lecture. This is at one point is quite unsuitable because of the crowd, and also how to manage it is to express concern and to avoid sensitive issues to discuss in an open forum. How to resolve it is more to segregate religiosity issues to other authorities to handle, and to educate personnel in PCVE matters in a more conducive environment. It is more on the environmental change. And the last is the lack of thorough management mechanism. This is more towards the internal problem in the unit. The need to have more discussion between MDIO and the military unit to eliminate any forms of violent extremism, to escalate, and also for early detection. How to resolve it is more on to review the latest policy, procedures, and regulation on PCVE, and have maximum penalty in committing the offenses. And this is under the structural change. Okay, let me move on to another evaluation method, or the measurement method, which is the VEEM, the Violent Extremism Evaluation Measures Framework. This is more to assess the individual itself, the attitudes and emotion that reflects their belief and behavior. There are 3 stages. The first is the initial stage, whereby this is more to identify their characteristic, whether their dissatisfaction, their skepticism, and also sense of grievance towards the society, authority, and organization. We have identified 8 participants from all the participants that are interviewed into this category. The next is the initial manifestation. This attributes towards their surroundings of friends, colleagues, and families in terms of indicators whether they are involved in violent extremism and external influences. And the last, which is, we identified 3 participants in this group. And the last stage, which is the extremist manifestation, is more linked the individuals towards the ideology of a group, recruitment and indoctrination of Violent Extremism Act. There are no participants in this group. Therefore, we can conclude that most of military personnel have the tendency and incline towards violent extremism acts at the early stage and not towards the militant or terrorist stage. Here are some of the statistics of the Precise Satria program. Precise Satria program is the de-radicalization program. We can see from the graph in 2015 there is 46 cases. Compared to 2022, there is a decline in 10 cases. There is some gap between 2017 to 2022. This is most likely because of the effectiveness of the program itself, and in 2020 and 2021 because of COVID-19 and the regroup, and they have evolved in terms of terrorism, and there is cases in 2022. The way forward. From here, we can conclude there is two distinctive aspects for me to highlight. The first is more on the empirical studies as a foundation for violent extremism studies to be broadened in different perspectives. The deficiency of research in PCVE program is evident. We need to encourage more substantial studies on PCVE, especially in Malaysian Armed Forces. Of course, there are lack of research on transformational paradigm and vigorous efforts towards human behavior and attitude of military personnel involved in Violent Extremism Act. The secondly is the interconnectivity of case studies that is being conducted and linked towards the Defense White Paper in Chapter 2, which is a strategic outlook of non-traditional security threats. And the second aspect is on the practical approach towards improving policies. This is evident because we can witness here that we do not have a PCVE strategy at the national level. So to formulate the PCVE strategy committee at the national level is vital. To construct a systematic and comprehensive PCVE program is also in need because to integrate with other services in Malaysian Armed Forces and also other agencies. Secondly is to educate military personnel on PCVE for self-awareness and to incorporate 3 domains of cognitive, affective, and psychomotor, which is more on psychological part, approach for early prevention measures. And lastly is to introduce a more conducive, friendly method of open forum discussion, facilitate and frequent engagement held among military families and friends in terms of PCVE matters. That's all for today. I'll end up my presentation today with a quote by a Muslim scholar by the name of Yusuf Qaradawi, who passed away 2 days ago. He mentioned that the malaise afflicting the soul and mind of mankind is far more deeply rooted than we think, and consequently more difficult to treat than we might expect. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Colonel Dr. Nizlan from MiDAS. We will now open up the floor for a Q&A session. For those who have questions, you may proceed to the closest mic, and please do indicate your name and also the organization you're from. We'll take this one first.
Okay. Good evening, everyone, and prestigious guests, Dato, and all the agency. Good evening. My name is Wayne Xu. I'm from the Institute of Diplomacy and Foreign Relations, IDFR. So I have practically 2 questions, one to Mr. Mart and one for Colonel Dr. Nizlan. So in regard for the first question itself, we do understand that ASEAN's still quite vulnerable in the sense of terrorism, but in part that the terrorism keep evolving. Instead, they have a cyber security issues in the ASEAN region itself. So we are totally in a vulnerable state. The disseminations of extremist ideas still coming into ASEAN, the region still able to counter it. So we got to take knowledge about it. So in the sense of Mr. Mart, about EU stand in ASEAN, may I know what's your view in the future forward, how we able to counter, maybe try to build a resilient cybersecurity in ASEAN, information that we can counter all sort of the extremism and disseminations. So that will be the first question. And the second question is with Dr. Colonel, Dr. Nizlams. So it's about the Malaysian Armed Force itself, the terrorism. So what's the main factors that drive maybe an army's, a soldier, to be terrorists? That's my second question. So thank you very much.
Yes, thank you for the question on cyber security, or in any way cyber. It's not because I didn't mention as a priority in the EU plan that it's not a priority for the EU in this region here. Let me say like this. First of all, it is, for instance, a priority, and we have activities, the EU funds activity, for instance, already in Singapore on cybersecurity related to terrorism. Secondly, there will be on the 24th of October a conference on cybersecurity, also related to terrorism, for different partners in the region and also for colleagues of maritime security and so. So cybersecurity will be more and more important. As I mentioned, that the use of technologies or the misuse of technologies becomes more and more relevant for the future and important to take up in our activities and in our programs to be developed together with the ASEAN member states.
Okay. On the aspect of reasons why military personnel involved in violent extremism act, I mentioned earlier in my presentation, the involvement of military personnel in violent extremism is at early stage. They are more inclined and have tendency towards violent extremism. And there are various reasons for them to be involved. Some of it is more on this influence. They have a lot of them are more influenced towards their colleagues in terms of religious activities. They are more, some of it more, they have some financial problems. And there are one case that we could not detect until now. One military personnel is in Syria, which we can categorize him as a terrorist. He's still there. We have not located him where he is now. But the rest of these participants that I've interviewed more on that category of they have inclination towards violent extremism act because of influence by friends, in terms of religious activities, in terms of financial problems, and also they are not totally in that violent extremism act, but then some of them are more, they have sympathies to their friends, and this is more on the early stage of violent extremism. Thank you.
All right, we have another question from the lady in pink.
Hello everyone, I'm Trisna from Intan. My question is for Ms. Mala. All right, first and foremost, I'm very delighted to know all the programs that you've done with your organization to create awareness and building society resilience. That's very good. My question is, let me just read what I've prepared, right? How do you identify the market or the people for your awareness campaigns? Because oftentimes, I might be wrong here and I could be quite simplistic, but those people, particularly children, who are involved or enticed to be involved in terrorism are economically inferior, hence are perhaps harder to reach via mass media or social media. Or has there been any programs done related to this particular section of the society? Any views, please? Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Mala.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Okay, so the first part is there's a challenge when it comes to children. One is, if we would like to do a program with children, we still need to get the consent of the parents, and this has been a very sensitive issue as well. So if we have had any PCVE programs revolving around them, no. But are there plans? Yes. The plans is to actually work with the Ministry of Education and using the schools or the teachers, training them to identify if there's some issues happening, or also to give those subtle messaging of positive approaches. So that's currently still in talks. But as you said, we do understand that children are pretty vulnerable, and nowadays almost all children have a digital device. They are connected to the online world. But also looking at those who might not have the resources, like all this digital, the best platform for us to reach out to them is actually the school. So hopefully we can actually work with MOE on this. Thank you for the question.
Okay.
My name is Nazaria Osman again. I have two questions to ask. As a general public, I wanted to know from Colonel Dr. Rizani, you did mention about the program of Perisai Satria program. So what I understand that this program is meant for the military personnel, right? To de-radicalize them. So how about to the general public who were involved in these activities? So that is my first question. And my second question is to Mr. Mark. So since you are representing the EUs, I just want to know what is the degree of Islamophobia among the EU members now? That's it, because Islamophobia is always, being associated with terrorism activities as well among the Muslims. So can you please comment on that as well? Thank you.
Okay, I'll answer the first question. Okay, my research, my case study is specifically for military personnel involved in violent extremism. And those military personnel involved in violent extremism, they have categorized under this Perisai Satria program. Perisai Satria program is specifically for de-radicalization program. And it is only involved military personnel. If the public involved in such cases, then it is under the Ministry of Home Affairs. So the MDIO is only responsible for military personnel involved in violent extremism and categorized under the de-radicalization program. The de-radicalization program is a 5-day program schedule, and they are tailored towards specific cases according to their background of violent extremism. So it has proven that the success of the de-radicalization program, because we can see there is a decrease of cases involving military personnel, and it is an ongoing program. In 2020, as I mentioned, there is 10 personnel involved from diverse cases. But at the same time, when it is involved, the public is not under the military, it is under the Ministry of Home Affairs. Thank you.
May I just menyampuk sikit? Okay, so when it comes to general public, right, Siasat has been actually running our campaigns for general public. One of the digital content that you can actually see, it's actually part of our Senjata Saya campaign, where the word senjata, for those who here who don't understand Malay, senjata means weapon. So here what we do is we use weapon not as a weapon to attack, but weapon to build up resilience. So, or to actually counter such narratives. So we do run campaigns for general public, so that's not there. It does fall under what Siasat, that's under a digital strategic communication division. So if you have, you want to know more about it or you have more questions, please do email me. I'll share the, maybe the link. But you can actually go to YouTube and just click My Aman, and you can just check out all the digital campaigns that we have. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the question. Islamophobia in the EU member states, as you mentioned, we can discuss a lot about it, but my answer will be very simple. I think that there is not more Islamophobia in the EU member states than here in the region. This is one of the reasons that I told you that whatever we do here as EU in our role to have an added value for the region must be mutual, because we can learn from each other. What happens here happens also in Europe, in the same way, because we have, there are countries in Europe that are super multicultural. So we have the identical problems and we treat them the same way as we propose to do here. So basically, I think the answer is very brief. There is certainly not more Islamophobia in EU member states, in whatever EU member state, than here.
We have some questions online. This one is for you, Mr. Mark. Again, from Jasminda from RCIS Singapore. How should ASEAN nations take the approach regarding child returnees from Syria, as there is no program yet for child returnees, especially those who have been exposed to conflict zones such as Syria and Iraq?
Yes, thank you. The returnees and of targets, I would say, and their families, and especially children, is a very sensitive issue in many countries here, but is also a priority in certain countries. Of course, for instance, in Indonesia, it is a priority. I think we have, as EU, in my point of view, we have, of course, to support this, specifically on women and children that have to return. Important in this is that there should come, as quick as possible, very specialized and very good programs to realize this, and not waiting anymore. Secondly, it will be important, and this is the most important thing, is it's not only getting them back here, but it's again about rehabilitation and reintegration in society. And this is the most important thing. When we talk about children, if we get them back, this is already a good thing, but if we don't treat them, if we don't help them and rehabilitate and reintegrate them, they will be probably the terrorists of tomorrow. So, thank you.
Another question online from Alia from Unimas, also for Mr. Mark. You mentioned earlier about EU projects in Indonesia, such as community policing. How effective has it been, and can you share more information on its implementation?
The question is about policing in Europe, in Indonesia. No, there are already some regulations in Indonesia on community policing, but the population has, for the moment, a problem with it, because most of these regulations talk about the role of the police in this, the role of the police in their community, and getting information and then giving it further to investigation units. Community policing is much more than this. That's why I mentioned it, and this is the reason why I had already a few meetings with the government and with BNPT, the National Anti-Terrorism Agency. We will start with this in a very smooth way, because it's important that we start with the definition of community policing and convincing people that it has a good purpose, that it has this way of working, of the role of everyone in fighting against terrorism and in looking at signals in their community. the behavior of children. This is the role not only of this local agent that walks around in the streets, it's the role of everyone to detect this. And this is the reason why we as EU put this forward as a priority for the next years to come.
Thank you, Mr. Mark. With that, I think we will wrap up session 2. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you to Ms. Arul, Mr. Mark, and also Colonel Dr. Nizlan.